problem was the 1970s, a decade of bold style and fearless innovation. But let's be honest, not every bright idea back then struck gold. Some fizzled out spectacularly. Get ready for a trip down memory lane as we look back at some of the 70s most unforgettable commercial fails. Bell Picturephone. Bell Telephone, who later became known as AT&T, built a prototype telephone called the Model 1 Picturephone at the 1964 World's Fair. A few of these were operational throughout the 1960s. In 1970, Bell introduced its first commercial picturephone, but the service never really caught on. They charged $160 per month for the equipment and the service, plus a fee per minute on calls. That would be at least $1.2 per month in today's money, and that's if you never used it. The other downside of this piece of technology was that it was only intended to be used for person-to-person calls, and not full rooms of people like you might see on Skype. They tried to expand the service and even came out with a Model 2. But ultimately, they pulled the plug on it in 1972. In March of 2019, a pair of Model 2 picture phones sold for $7,575 at a New York auction. For that price, you'd expect it to at least predict lottery numbers, not just show you who you were avoiding. Polaroid Polavision. Polaroid dominated the instant photography market decades before the digital camera ever did. Following the success of the SX70 and one-step cameras, Polaroid decided to enter the home movie market in 1977. This market had been dominated by one of their competitors, which was Kodak and their Super 8 film. The Polaroid Polavision was designed to use a cartridge which resembled a small video cassette. It could be exposed and then developed in just minutes. The captured images could then be viewed on a special tabletop viewer, or if you removed the reel of film from the inside, then it could be shown on any Super 8 projector. The only problem was Polavision was a flop, and it never really became as popular as their film cameras. You had to shoot in very bright light, colors were flat and muddy, and they couldn't record sound the way that Super 8 cameras could. This became Polaroid's first commercial failure, and they ceased production in 1979. Today, you can find these cameras listed on eBay anywhere from $25 to $100. Instant home movies with no sound and muddy colors. Sounds like a perfect recipe for a nap. Sansui Quadraphonic Sound. The Sansui Quadraphonic Sound was a 4-channel home audio system that was completely different from the 2-speaker system that people had in the early 70s. Musicians had been experimenting with 4-channel recording since the late 60s. But Sansui was the first electronics maker to develop and sell the quadraphonic amplifier for the home market in 1972. It sold for $200, which is about $1,200 today. Other competitors also introduced quadraphonic systems, and some had joystick controllers which allowed listeners to shift the audio balance from left to right and front to back so that they could find that perfect sound. Record companies loved the idea, and some of the biggest names like Aerosmith, Eric Clapton, the Eagles, and many more released albums mixed for 4-channel stereos. But many consumers couldn't justify buying a new receiver for 2 additional speakers, and the concept ended in 1978. The music industry then moved on to digital recording, which was the next best thing in the market. These old quadraphonic receivers can still sell for around $200 if they are in working condition. 4 speakers to blast disco in your living room. Your neighbors must have loved that. Clairol Yogurt Shampoo. The 1970s saw a trend of incorporating natural food ingredients like lemon, honey, and other herbs into beauty and hygiene products. Clairol decided to up the game with yogurt shampoo in 1979. You know, because everyone wanted that healthy hair. Turns out, the company was completely wrong. Many consumers were confused about what they had purchased, and some people even tried eating it. Is it for my hair or my breakfast? A question no one should have to ask about their shampoo. Laserdisc. The Laserdisc was essentially a predecessor to the DVD. It was introduced in 1978 and offered consumers higher picture quality and sound than VHS tapes. However, they seemed to have more drawbacks than benefits. One of the biggest was the fact that you couldn't record on them. They were also pretty expensive. They hung on for a little while and then tried to make a comeback in the 1990s. But they ultimately failed for good when the DVD came on strong. Big, expensive, and couldn't record your favorite shows. The Laserdisc, a movie lover's very fancy frisbee. Speaking of things that didn't quite stick the landing, if you're enjoying these blasts from the past, why not give this video a like? And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on more trips down memory lane. We dig up all sorts of forgotten gems and duds. Sony Betamax. Betamax was introduced by Sony in 1975, which was 1 year before JVC introduced the VHS tape. Betamax had superior resolution and sound quality, which was why it remained a choice of different media outlets for decades. The problem with Betamax was that Sony refrained from licensing its technology to other manufacturers, which limited the variety of movies that were available on this format. Meanwhile, JVC licensed its VHS technology to any manufacturer that was interested. Betamax's share of the VCR market fell from 100% in 1975 to 10% by 1988, and it continued to dwindle in the following years. Betamax, the king of quality who forgot to invite anyone to the party. VHS just let everyone in. Gerber singles. In 1974, the baby food giant Gerber came up with a new idea. Why not create baby food for adults? They believed that there would be a market for this, and they couldn't be more wrong. Adults were never fond of the mushy meat and food, and Gerber's singles failed horribly, because nothing says sophisticated adult meal like strained peas in a tiny jar. Bon appetit? Downy Flakes Toaster Eggs. Downy Flakes toaster eggs were introduced in 1972. They looked like some sort of frisbee or hockey puck. They were hoping to capitalize on the popularity of other products like Pop-Tarts. But by 1975, they were removed from the store shelves. Toaster eggs that looked like hockey pucks. Maybe the goal was to make breakfast a contact sport. World Football League. Over the years, there have been several attempts to compete against the NFL. In 1974, the World Football League hit the field. It made it through one full season in 1974 and most of the second season when the whole idea fumbled. Their hopes of world football domination never really made it past 13 teams, one of which being in Honolulu, Hawaii. The World Football League, ambitious name, slightly less worldwide results. Aloha to that dream. Swing bike. The swing bike was a bicycle that allowed the rider to steer the front wheel and the rear wheel. The design was patented by Ralph Belden in 1974, and it was sold on the market in 1975. They really weren't meant for transportation as much as they were for looking cool and doing stunts. It had a second steering wheel axis in front of the seat. You could ride with one wheel on the curb and the other one in the road in sort of an S shape. The bike was somewhat difficult to steer, which meant that it was easier to fall and get hurt. It was discontinued in 1978. The swing bike. Today, most of these products aren't much more than a memory. Very few of them have ever survived the trash dump. But if you happen to have some of these and you're willing to sell them, then perhaps you can make a pretty penny on eBay. Can you think of any other failures from the 1970s that we missed? Let us know in the comments below. We love hearing about the gadgets and gizmos.
To Sony's revolutionary Betamax deck, which hooks up to any TV set. Now you can automatically videotape your favorite show even when you're not home and watch it anytime you...
In disbelief, please hit that like button. And be sure to subscribe for more dives into the fascinating and sometimes funny history of things.
Most people who grew up poor in the 1970s didn't know what they were missing, and they assumed everyone lived the very same way. Back then, stretching a dollar was an art form with creative and sometimes funny solutions for being short on cash. Looking back, it's easy to see the struggle, but it's just as easy to smile as you think back on your own childhood. So, here they are, the signs that you might have grown up poor in the 1970s. The creative solutions. In a lot of homes, the TV's channel knob broke off at some point and never got replaced. Instead of buying a new TV set or calling for a repairman, families just grabbed a pair of pliers and kept them on top of the TV as a permanent solution. Turning the dial became a careful operation, especially if the picture was fuzzy. Everyone in the house learned how to use the pliers just right, clicking through the channels slowly, hoping to land on one that came in clear. Wearing patched clothing wasn't anything unusual. When jeans or skirts wore thin or ripped, especially at the knees, parents would sew on a patch instead of tossing them out. Iron-on patches were popular, but sometimes they were stitched on by hand with whatever fabric or thread was around. Clothes were handed down, worn out, patched, and worn again. It wasn't about fashion. It was about keeping things going as long as possible. It wasn't uncommon for a family car to have trouble starting, especially if it was an older model. If the battery was weak, pushing the car to get it rolling and then popping the clutch was the go-to method. One person would sit in the driver's seat while others gave it a push until the engine caught. It was frustrating at times, but it was just another part of daily life when you didn't have the money for repairs. During the winter, bread bags served as makeshift waterproof liners for boots. If your shoes had holes or weren't insulated, you could slip a bread bag over your socks to help keep your feet dry. It wasn't the most comfortable setup, but it was what families used when buying new boots wasn't an option. The food we grew up with. Buying bread from the day-old shelf was common in families trying to stretch a dollar. It was usually just slightly less soft than the fresh loaves, but perfectly fine for toast or sandwiches. No one really thought of it as less than. It was just a practical way to keep the pantry stocked without spending extra. Government assistance programs provided things like large blocks of processed cheese and powdered milk to help families get by. The cheese worked great for sandwiches or even cooking. Powdered milk was mixed with water and stored in the fridge, though it didn't taste much like the real thing. These foods weren't fancy, but they helped stretch the grocery budgets during tough times. Bologna sandwiches were a lunchbox regular for kids in the 70s, served on plain white bread. They were quick, cheap, and filling. Some families fried the bologna in a pan to give it extra flavor. It wasn't gourmet, but it was what many kids grew up eating day after day, and most didn't think twice about it. If you showed up at school without lunch money or a packed meal, the school would give you a plain peanut butter sandwich. It was dry, basic, and came with a carton of milk if you were lucky. It wasn't something kids looked forward to, but it was better than going hungry. Most kids who had to eat it didn't complain. They just ate quietly and moved on with their day. The unspoken rules. Writing a check before payday wasn't reckless. It was strategy. Parents would keep a close eye on what day they got paid and time the check accordingly, knowing it would take a day or two before the bank processed it. It was just one of those everyday ways people made things work when money was tight. When birthdays or holidays rolled around, many families got creative with wrapping paper. Instead of buying expensive gift wrap, they used the comic section of the newspaper or cut up brown paper grocery bags. The results were simple, but they did the job just fine. Sometimes kids even decorated the plain bags with drawings to make them feel more special. In many homes, the thermostat was strictly off-limits to kids. If it was cold, you were told to wear a sweater. If it was too hot, you opened a window, but not for long. Leaving a door open, even for a few seconds, was sure to get a sharp reminder from a parent. Trying to keep heating and cooling bills low. These rules weren't meant to be mean. They were just practical. At the start of the school year, teachers often asked kids to write about their summer vacations. For those who hadn't gone anywhere, it meant finding ways to make the ordinary sound exciting. Playing outside, going to the city pool, or visiting the cousins became the highlights. You didn't realize until later that some kids went on big trips. You just figured everyone's summer looked like yours. Looking back, these weren't just signs of being poor. They were signs of being resourceful. These memories are a reminder of a time when we valued creativity over convenience and effort over expense. We were a generation that learned to make do with what we had, and we didn't think twice about it. What was your experience? Let me know in the comments if I missed anything. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more memories from the past.
The 1980s. A decade of big hair, blockbuster movies, and, well, some inventions so out there, you have to wonder, what were they thinking? We all remember the Walkman and the VCR, but what about the brilliant ideas that crashed and burned harder than a stock market broker in 1987? Today, we're digging into 10 of the most spectacular product fails from the iconic 80s. Buckle up, this is going to be a bumpy but hilarious ride. New Coke. Let's start with a true legend of failure. New Coke. In 1985, the Coca-Cola Company made a monumental decision to change its nearly century-old secret formula. Why? Believe it or not, Pepsi was gaining ground in taste tests. So, New Coke was born, sweeter and supposedly preferred in blind tests. The public outcry, however, was immediate and ferocious. People didn't just dislike New Coke, they felt betrayed. Hoarding of original Coke began, protests erupted, and the company was flooded with angry calls and letters. No, within a mere 79 days, Coca-Cola waved the white flag and brought back the original formula, rebranded as Coca-Cola Classic. New Coke limped on for a few more years under different names, but never recovered. It became a textbook example of, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Especially when it is a beloved American icon. New Coke, the beverage equivalent of a surprise party nobody wanted. Sometimes, progress tastes an awful lot like regret. Kodak disc film. Remember the excitement of getting your photos developed? Kodak tried to make it even easier in 1982 with their disc film. Instead of a roll, the film was arranged on a flat disc housed in a plastic cartridge. The cameras were slim, pocketable, and super easy to load. Just pop in the disc. The idea was to make photography foolproof for the average snap shooter. The problem? The negatives on the disc were tiny, just 10 millimeters by 8 meters. This resulted in grainy, often blurry photos if you tried to enlarge them to standard print sizes. Despite massive marketing, the poor image quality couldn't be ignored. Professional photographers scoffed, and even casual users noticed their vacation pics looked a bit sad. While the cameras sold well initially due to convenience, the film format itself was a dud and was eventually discontinued in 1999. Kodak disc film. proving that sometimes convenience comes at the very fuzzy, very grainy price of your memories. Premier cigarettes. In the late 80s, with smoking already facing increased scrutiny, Reynolds Tobacco Company launched Premier, marketed as a cleaner, smokeless cigarette. The technology was complex. A small carbon tip heated a tobacco-like capsule, releasing an aerosol rather than smoke. It produced almost no secondhand smoke and significantly less tar. Sounds like a game changer, right? Well, not quite. Users complained it was difficult to light, had a bizarre, often unpleasant taste and smell. Some compared it to burning plastic, or even worse. One critic famously said it tasted like fecal matter. Moreover, the media and health officials were skeptical, and there were even concerns it could be used as a drug delivery device. After spending hundreds of millions on development, Premier was quickly extinguished from the market within a year. Premier cigarettes, so advanced, they forgot to make them smokable. The future of smoking, apparently, smelled terrible. Seiko TV watch. Imagine this. It's 1982, and James Bond himself is sporting a watch that can receive television broadcasts. The Seiko TV watch, or the DXA-001, was pure 80s sci-fi made real. It featured a tiny 1.2-inch liquid crystal display. To actually watch TV, you needed to connect it to a Walkman-sized receiver that you'd typically clip to your belt or keep in a pocket, plus a bulky headset antenna. It was an incredible feat of miniaturization for its time, but practicality was another story. The screen was minuscule, battery life was short, and the price tag was a hefty $495. That's over $1,500 in today's money. It was more of a very expensive, somewhat cumbersome novelty than a truly useful device. While undeniably cool, it didn't exactly fly off the shelves. The Seiko TV watch. For when you absolutely, positively had to watch a grainy, postage stamp-sized soap opera on your wrist, and didn't mind looking like you were trying to contact outer space, feeling that 80s nostalgia, or maybe just marveling at these misfires. If you're enjoying this trip back in time, do us a favor and hit that like button. And if you haven't already, subscribe and ring that notification bell so you don't miss our next batch of retro oddities and forgotten treasures. Fisher-Price PXL 2000. In 1987, Fisher-Price, known for its durable kids' toys, ventured into a new market with the PXL 2000, also known as Pixel Vision. It was a camcorder marketed to children, promising them the ability to make their own movies. The truly unique and cost-saving part was that it recorded black and white video and audio onto standard audio cassette tapes. Each cassette could hold about 11 minutes of grainy, low-resolution footage. While the idea of a kid-friendly camcorder was appealing, and the $100 price tag was relatively low, the video quality was, to put it mildly, very basic. It was often blurry, with a distinct, ghostly aesthetic. Commercially, it wasn't a huge hit and was discontinued after a couple of years. However, its unique look later made it a cult favorite among experimental filmmakers and artists. The PXL 2000. Making home movies look like eerie surveillance footage from another dimension, all on your dad's old Bon Jovi tapes. Pepsi AM. Need a little pick-me-up with your bacon and eggs? In 1989, Pepsi decided that what the world really needed was a cola specifically for breakfast. Enter Pepsi AM. It boasted all the sugar and twice the caffeine of regular Pepsi, supposedly formulated to compete with coffee. The marketing campaign suggested it was the perfect way to get your day going. Consumers, however, were largely unconvinced that a sugary, highly caffeinated soda was the ideal morning beverage. The idea of cracking open a Pepsi at 7 a.m. just didn't sit right with most folks. Unsurprisingly, Pepsi AM had a very short shelf life and was discontinued by 1990. Pepsi AM. Because who needs coffee when you can start your day with a sugar rush and enough caffeine to power a small city? Apparently, most people. The DeLorean car. Few cars are as instantly recognizable as the DeLorean DMC-12, with its iconic stainless steel body and those futuristic gull-wing doors. Brainchild of former GM exec John DeLorean, it launched in 1981 with immense hype. Marketed as an ethical sports car, it was built in Northern Ireland. However, the dream quickly soured. The car was criticized for being underpowered for its price, had build quality issues, and the stainless steel panels were famously difficult to paint and showed every fingerprint. The company faced severe financial troubles, and John DeLorean himself was arrested in a highly publicized, though ultimately unsuccessful, drug trafficking sting in 1982, an attempt to save his failing company. Production halted by 1983 after only about 9,000 cars were made. While a commercial disaster in its time, its starring role in Back to the Future cemented its place in pop culture history. The DeLorean. It couldn't quite hit 88 mph in the sales charts, but it sure made a dent in cinematic history. Great Scott, what a business plan. Atari Touch tablet. In the early 80s, home computers were booming, and Atari was a huge name. To enhance its 8-bit computer line, Atari released the Touch tablet in 1983. This was a graphics tablet that allowed users to draw directly onto the computer screen using a special stylus. It came bundled with a drawing program called Atari Artist. The idea was to make computers more accessible and creative for art and design. While it was a neat concept, the tablet wasn't a massive commercial success. It was perhaps a bit ahead of its time for the home market. The software was limited, and it faced competition from other input devices like joysticks and light pens, which were more geared towards gaming, Atari's main strength. It remained a niche product for enthusiasts rather than a mainstream hit. The Atari Touch tablet, letting you draw like Picasso, if Picasso only had 16 colors and was really patient with early 80s processing speeds. Private eye display. Long before Google Glass or VR headsets became common buzzwords, a company called Reflection Technology was pioneering wearable displays in the late 1980s. Their flagship product was the Private Eye, a miniature display that, when held up to one eye, created the illusion of a full-sized monitor floating in space. It used a rapidly vibrating mirror and a strip of LEDs to project an image. The concept was revolutionary, promising hands-free information access for everyone from technicians to surgeons. Several companies licensed it for various products, including a head-mounted display for a portable computer and even a potential video game peripheral for Nintendo. However, most of these end products either failed to materialize or were commercial flops themselves. The Private Eye was groundbreaking tech, but the world and supporting applications just weren't quite ready for it. The Private Eye, giving you a tiny glimpse of the future, one slightly headache-inducing red-on-black display at a time. Speaker Vest. The 80s were all about making a statement, and what better way to do that than to literally wear your music? Enter the Speaker Vest. This fashion-forward, or fashion-failed, garment featured built-in speakers, usually on the shoulders or chest, connected to a pocket for your personal cassette player like a Walkman. The idea was to have your own personal soundtrack on the go without pesky headphones. However, the sound quality was often tinny. The vests could be bulky. And let's face it, broadcasting your taste in music to everyone around you wasn't always appreciated. It was a novelty item that screamed 80s fad and never achieved mainstream acceptance. quickly becoming a quirky footnote in the history of wearable tech. The speaker vest. For those who wanted to share their love of Journey with the entire bus, whether the bus wanted to hear it or not. And there you have it, 10 titans of technological turmoil from the 1980s. It just goes to show that for every brilliant success, there are a dozen ideas that seemed better on the drawing board. Which of these 80s fails do you remember? Or did we miss one that you think deserves a spot on the list of legendary flops? Let us know in the comments below. We love hearing your memories. If you enjoyed this blast from the past and want more retro reviews, forgotten tech, and pop culture deep dives, make sure you give this video a big thumbs up.
You know, in the 70s, smoking indoors was commonplace. Whether you were at a restaurant, office, or even a hospital, the air was often thick with the smell of tobacco. This relaxed attitude toward indoor smoking would be unacceptable today. And what about our environment? Leaded gasoline was the norm, fueling cars across the nation. The dangers of lead to human health were not yet fully understood or addressed. Today, unleaded gasoline is standard. This is a significant change from the past. We were a lot looser with our environment in general. Lax pollution controls meant that factories often emitted pollutants without much oversight. We didn't have the Clean Air Act yet. Nowadays, businesses face strict regulations, reflecting a major shift toward environmental responsibility. Inside our homes, asbestos was widely used in buildings. It was valued for its fire-resistant properties, but the health risks were not fully understood. Today, asbestos use is heavily regulated, and its removal is a specialized process. Even in our food, the use of pesticides was unregulated. Farmers often relied on pesticides to maximize yields without much oversight. Today, stricter regulations govern pesticide use to protect ecosystems and public health. And believe it or not, you could still find homes using lead pipes for water. Many households drank tap water directly, unaware of the potential health risks. Today, lead pipes have been largely replaced with safer materials. Now, the 1970s were a wild time on the road. Driving without seatbelts was the norm. It wasn't uncommon to see children bouncing around the back seat or even sitting in the front without restraints. This shift highlights the growing awareness and importance of road safety over the decades. And child car seats were minimal. Many families simply held babies on laps or let children roam freely in the back seat. Today, laws require the use of age-appropriate car seats, prioritizing child safety. We also had a more relaxed approach to alcohol. Drinking while driving was allowed in many places. The sight of a driver sipping a beer was not as shocking as it is today. Nowadays, the dangers of drinking and driving are well documented, and strict regulations aim to prevent impaired driving. We were also a lot more casual about how we traveled. Unrestricted airline smoking was allowed on airplanes. Passengers and crew were exposed to secondhand smoke, an accepted part of air travel at the time. Today, in-flight smoking bans reflect a commitment to healthier travel experiences. Life for a kid in the 70s was a lot different. Unsupervised playtime was the norm. We roamed neighborhoods freely without constant parental oversight. This freedom fostered independence and creativity, but also came with risks. Today, parental supervision is more common. And when we rode our bikes, bicycle helmets were not required. Children and adults alike rode freely, unaware of the risks of head injuries. Today, wearing a helmet is an essential safety measure. There was also a different attitude toward discipline. Public school spanking was a common disciplinary method in schools. Teachers and principals were often allowed to administer physical punishment for misbehavior. Today, many educational systems have shifted toward more positive reinforcement techniques. What about our purchases? Unregulated advertising to children meant that toy and cereal ads dominated TV during Saturday morning cartoons. Companies could exploit young audiences with little oversight. Today, regulations limit the methods and content of advertisements directed at children. Some people were just a lot more trusting. Hitchhiking everywhere was a popular mode of traveling. It was seen as an adventurous and cost-effective way to explore the country. However, the practice has significantly declined as safety concerns and awareness of potential dangers have grown. The 70s also had some rules that just wouldn't fly today. Open alcohol containers were allowed in public spaces like parks and beaches. Social gatherings often featured beer and wine without much restriction. Today, many areas have enacted laws to control alcohol consumption in public. And what about our clothes? Lead paint in homes was widely used in homes during the 1970s. The health risks, particularly to children, were not fully recognized at the time. Today, lead paint is banned in many places. Our personal style was also a lot different. DIY home improvements with hazardous materials were common. DIY enthusiasts worked with materials now considered hazardous, like asbestos, without awareness of potential health risks. Today, regulations and awareness campaigns promote safe practices. And for those who got a tattoo, unregulated tattoo inks were used. Artists often mixed their own inks without oversight, leading to potential health risks. Today, regulations ensure safe, sterile tattooing environments. And one more thing. Public fireworks displays without permits were a common sight. Crowds gathered in parks and open spaces, mesmerized by the colorful explosions. Today, organized fireworks events require permits and adherence to strict safety protocols. It's amazing how a few decades can completely change our perspective. These habits and rituals show us that what's considered normal is always changing. They remind us of a time when life felt a little wilder, a little more trusting, and a little more dangerous. What activity from this list surprised you the most? Or is there a tradition from your own childhood that you can't believe was once normal? Share your memories below. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more videos about the incredible stories behind your favorite retro TV shows.
Let's rewind the clock to 15 beautiful little things from the 1970s that kids today might never understand. But for those of us who lived it, these moments will never fade. Playing outside until the streetlights came on. There was a kind of freedom in the 1970s that's hard to explain to kids today. You'd throw on a pair of cut-off jeans, grab your bike, maybe not even tell your parents exactly where you were headed, and disappear for the day. You played in the woods, built forts, raced down gravel alleys, and hopped fences into neighboring yards without a second thought. Lunch Maybe you ran home for a peanut butter sandwich, maybe you didn't. Streetlights were the universal curfew. As dusk settled and the warm glow buzzed to life along the sidewalks, you knew it was time to head back. Sweaty, bruised, mosquito-bitten, but happier than any video game high score could ever make you. The whole neighborhood felt like an endless playground. There was trust from parents, from neighbors, and from the kids themselves. We learned risk. We learned resilience. We learned how to handle ourselves without a phone call every hour. Building rickety ramps with old plywood and trying to jump them on my banana seat bike. Catching lightning bugs in jars we poked holes into, only to let them go just before bedtime. Playing hide and seek across 3 entire blocks and knowing every nook, bush, and creaky fence like the back of your hand. It was dangerous. It was messy. It was glorious. And it's a kind of freedom most kids today will never quite understand. Saturday morning cartoons. If you grew up in the 70s, Saturday mornings weren't just about sleeping in, they were about ritual. You'd bolt out of bed still in your pajamas, grab the biggest mixing bowl you could find, dump in a mound of Cap'n Crunch or Fruit Loops, and plant yourself in front of the TV for the next glorious 3 or 4 hours. Cartoons were only on Saturday mornings. No Netflix. No YouTube Kids. If you missed Super Friends or Bugs Bunny or the Pink Panther show, tough luck. You'd have to wait a full week. Those hours were pure magic. Bright colors on tube TVs. Jingles for sugary cereals and Saturday toy commercials. Laugh tracks on Hanna-Barbera cartoons. You didn't multitask. You didn't scroll. You were fully there. Some houses even smelled different on Saturday mornings, a mix of burnt toast, maple syrup, and dusty TV tubes heating up. And your siblings. They weren't your enemies yet. They were your couch buddies, trading jokes and fighting for the best seat closest to the screen. Saturday morning wasn't just for cartoons. It was for being a kid, completely unapologetically, joyfully family dinners every night. In the 1970s, dinner wasn't optional. Around 600 p.m., kitchens buzzed with noise, the clatter of pans, the clink of silverware, the thump of a screen door swinging shut as kids rushed in from playing. No one texted on my way or ate microwaved leftovers alone at 9 p.m. You sat down together. Moms wore aprons. Dads maybe still smelled faintly of aftershave and sweat from a long day at work. Conversations were messy, loud, imperfect. You talked about grades, friends, what was on Walter Cronkite that evening. Sometimes arguments flared over who got the last roll or why Bobby didn't do his homework. Sometimes you sat in silence, just grateful for mashed potatoes and gravy. And sometimes you laughed until you cried. Family dinners were the anchor of the day. They taught manners. They built bonds. They made you feel deep in your bones that no matter what the world threw at you, you belonged somewhere. Looking back, the meals themselves weren't memorable, but the people that clatter and clamor and chaotic love, that's what made us strong. Station wagons without seat belts. Nothing screamed family adventure, quite like a station wagon loaded with kids, pets, coolers, and 0 seat belts. In the 1970s, the family station wagon was a symbol of freedom. Moms and dads packed us in, sometimes 5 across in the back seat, sometimes two or three wedged into the way back facing traffic, waving wildly at truckers. We sprawled on vinyl seats that burned the backs of our legs in summer, leaned over the back seat to wrestle over a Viewmaster, or laid down for naps during long drives. No booster seats, no regulations, just pure wobbly trust. The way back was a world unto itself. Some kids brought coloring books. Some just stared out the window, imagining adventures. Some kids, like me, counted cars by color, secretly wishing every third truck would be a shiny red one. Parents didn't check apps for traffic updates. They fought over folding road maps while Dad muttered, "I know a shortcut." Sure, it wasn't safe by today's standards, but the laughter, the songs sung out of tune, the snacks passed hand to hand while the windows steamed up from laughter, that was family. And somehow, most of us survived with nothing worse than a skinned knee or an elbow to the ribs. Road trips without technology. Remember being trapped in a car for 8 hours with nothing but your imagination. Road trips in the 1970s were a test of endurance and creativity. There were no tablets, no backseat DVD players, no Spotify playlists. We had two choices: look out the window and make up your own fun. License plate games, counting cows, playing I Spy until everyone cheated. The AM radio crackled out static-filled tunes, the Eagles' Fleetwood Mac, maybe a bit of Merle Haggard. If you were lucky, the station didn't fade into static 5 miles down the highway. Meals were roadside diners with sticky booths and smiling waitresses who called everyone honey. Motels flashed color TV signs like it was the height of luxury. The journey mattered as much as the destination. Maybe more. Families sang, argued, played pranks, shared stories. And somewhere between the endless fields, the broken vending machines, and the sunsets slipping behind the horizon, we found adventure. Maybe you remember sitting in the back seat, forehead pressed to the glass, counting stars, until you fell asleep to the hum of tires on pavement. Vinyl records, long before playlists and algorithms. There was the simple, sacred act of dropping the needle on a vinyl record. In the 1970s, music wasn't just background noise, it was an event. You thumbed through heavy sleeves in the living room cabinet, flipping past Cream, Simon and Garfunkel, Janis Joplin. You picked the album carefully based on your mood, the weather, the kind of afternoon it was shaping up to be. Lowering the tone arm onto the spinning black disc was a ritual. The soft static, the first crackle, the thump of the needle finding the groove, it was magic. We didn't songs, we didn't skip. We listened to whole albums from beginning to end, the way the artist intended. Album covers doubled as posters. Lyric sheets were memorized like sacred texts. And when you got your first record player or your first grown-up album bought with allowance money, you felt like the coolest person alive. Even today, hearing the opening bars of a vinyl spun favorite, maybe Hotel California, maybe Tapestry, it doesn't just bring back a song. It brings back a room, a smell, a season of life. Making mixtapes. Before, there were playlists curated by algorithms. There were mixtapes, handmade, heart-poured collections of songs that told a story only you understood. In the 1970s, making a mixtape wasn't just hitting save, it was an art, a ritual, a statement. You'd sit by the radio for hours, finger hovering over the record button, waiting for the DJ to spin your favorite song. You prayed they wouldn't talk over the intro. You cursed softly when they did. Timing was everything. You wanted the songs to flow one into the next, like a perfect conversation between melodies. Some mixtapes were for friends. Some were for secret crushes. Some were for yourself. A soundtrack for your summer, your heartbreak, your growing up. Remember, crafting handwritten track lists, decorating cassette cases with stickers, doodles, inside jokes only you and your best friend understood. Each cassette was a physical piece of time capturing not just music, but moments, feelings, entire seasons of your life. Today, playlists disappear with a swipe, but mixtapes, they're forever burned into our hearts. That kids today might never understand, but for those of us who lived it, these moments will never fade. It was about green stamps, those tiny, sticky tokens of hope and patience. Every trip to the supermarket, the gas station, the department store meant a handful of S&H green stamps stuffed into your mom's purse. Kids would scramble to paste them neatly into booklets, careful not to rip the fragile edges. Whole families schemed about what they were saving up for: a shiny new toaster, a set of crystal glasses, maybe that coveted wagon for the youngest sibling. Redeeming the stamps was an event. You'd walk into the redemption center, a cross between a department store and a treasure trove, and finally trade in months of saving for something tangible, something earned. In a world before loyalty, apps, and cashback bonuses, green stamps taught kids and parents alike the value of delayed gratification. And decades later, just the sight of that green and white logo can still trigger the sweet memory of sticky fingers, glossy catalogs, and dreams glued onto brown pages. Malls as the ultimate hangout, long before social media, before viral videos and TikTok dances, there was the mall, and it was everything. In the 1970s, malls weren't just places to shop. They were safe havens for teenagers, freedom wrapped in climate-controlled air conditioning. You met under the food court clock. You roamed in packs from Orange Julius to Spencer's Gifts, past the glowing arcade, and into the record store to flip through LPs you couldn't afford. Maybe you scored a first kiss by the fountain. Maybe you got caught sneaking into the theater for a PG-rated movie. Maybe you just wandered for hours dreaming. Moms loved malls because they were safe. Teens loved malls because they weren't at home. And the food: greasy pizza slices, giant pretzels, frozen yogurt, the staples of a youth well spent. Malls taught us how to meet up, how to hang out, and how to be just a little more grown up while still clinging tightly to the last best parts of being a kid. Party lines. Imagine lifting the receiver to call your friend and hearing two complete strangers already deep into a conversation about pie recipes and church gossip. Welcome to Party Lines. In rural America, through the 1960s and early 70s, multiple households shared a single telephone line. Your ring was different. 2 short rings, 1 long. But let's be honest, curiosity often got the better of manners. We eavesdropped. We giggled. We learned way more about Mrs. Thompson's gallbladder surgery than we ever wanted to. Sometimes you needed the phone urgently. You'd politely pick up, listen awkwardly for a gap, and interject. "Excuse me, could you hang up? I need to call the school." And if the line was busy too long, moms would march down the street and knock on doors to settle things, neighbor to neighbor. There were no texts, no private calls to teenage crushes without the whole town knowing. Party lines taught us patience, negotiation, and the fine art of keeping secrets or not. And sometimes late at night, if you picked up quietly, you might just catch a forbidden love story whispered in the static drinking water, straight from the hose, hot day, dusty sneakers. You dropped your bike onto the lawn, ran to the side of the house, and yanked the garden hose from its metal holder. You turned the spigot full blast, waited for the scalding hot first burst to clear, and tipped that hose right into your mouth. It tasted like rubber, like sun-baked vinyl, like freedom. Nobody cared about BPA or filtration systems. No one worried about lead pipes or water purity levels. You were thirsty, and the hose was there. Sometimes you sprayed your friends. Sometimes you sprayed yourself. Sometimes, if you were lucky, you sprayed the dog, and he chased you around the yard. Barking garden hoses weren't just for drinking. They cooled you off, washed your scraped knees, and filled up wading pools until they sagged and split under the weight. Some memories come in high def. This one, it comes back cool, sharp, and deliciously real, like a mouthful of hose water on a 95-degree afternoon. Homemade book covers for textbooks. September meant school supply shopping, a new pencil case, a 3-ring binder, and of course stacks of battered dog-eared textbooks handed down from older students. The first assignment wasn't algebra or spelling. It was covering your textbooks. You'd sit at the kitchen table with brown grocery bags, safety scissors, and a roll of Scotch tape carefully crafting covers that fit just so. Some kids doodled all over them, hearts, lightning bolts, the names of rock bands scratched in bubble letters. Some kept them pristine, terrified of Ms. Jacobs and her zero tolerance for damaged books policy. The smart ones used the inside folds to hide cheat sheets, dates for history class, conjugations for Spanish. Homemade book covers weren't glamorous, but they were personal creative and a rite of passage. Every scribble told a story. Every bent corner said, "I survived another year." And every saved grocery bag tucked into the bottom of a backpack meant you were ready for whatever the year might throw at you. Passing notes in class. Before texting, before WhatsApp, before secret Snapchats, there was the humble, heroic, heart-pounding note passed in class. You'd fold a torn piece of notebook paper into intricate shapes, triangles, squares, little footballs, and flick or sneak it across desks when the teacher wasn't looking. One eye on the clock, one eye on Mrs. Collins scribbling equations on the blackboard. Inside those notes, worlds. Did you hear about Tommy and Lisa? Want to come over after school? I like you. Do you like me? Check yes or no. Getting caught meant serious consequences. Allowed ahem from the teacher. Detention, humiliation as she read your deepest 12-year-old thoughts aloud to the entire class. But when a note made it through, the rush of triumph, the whisper of rebellion, the secret smile passed from one side of the room to the other. We weren't just sending messages. We were building friendships, taking risks, falling a little bit in love, one folded scrap at a time, riding bikes without helmets, Freedom came on two wheels, not on motorbikes, not on scooters, but on battered Schwinn, Stingrays, banana seats, gleaming in the sun, and not a helmet in sight. You felt invincible. You popped wheelies. You raced down gravel alleys without brakes. You played Evel Knievel over homemade ramps made from scrap wood and cinder blocks. Skinned knees were badges of honor. Torn jeans were just uniforms of glory. Parents weren't reckless. They just believed in toughness, resilience, and the occasional tetanus shot. And if your best friend wiped out, what did you do? You laughed. You helped them up. You dared them to try it again. Those rides didn't just get us from point A to B. They gave us our first taste of freedom adventure and the purest kind of summer joy. Monday Night Football family events. In the 1970s, Monday nights weren't just another weekday. They were sacred. Around 8 p.m., dinner dishes clattered into sinks. Homework was stuffed half-finished into trapper keepers, and dads clicked the TV dial to ABC Howard Cosell's unmistakable voice cut through living rooms across America. Welcome to Monday Night Football. Families crowded onto couches. Bowls of popcorn were passed around. Arguments broke out over which team was better. Some kids snuck sips of Coke late into the night. Some moms rolled their eyes but stayed just to feel part of it. The games themselves. Sure, they mattered, but mostly Monday nights were about belonging, about routines that stitched families together, about the shared cheers, the groans, the sleepy trips to bed afterward, still wearing your team's jersey. Monday Night Football wasn't just a game. It was an American tradition, a heartbeat, a memory that still echoes down through the years.
Do you remember those toys that didn't come in a box? The ones that didn't make a sound, didn't need batteries, and were never featured on a commercial? They were the hand-me-downs, the treasures from the junk drawer, the simple scraps, and for a poor kid in the 1972nd, they were everything. Looking back now, why do those cheap, simple things mean more than anything that ever came in a shiny box? Cardboard box forts. They weren't toys you bought, they were toys you waited for. A new refrigerator, a washing machine, a big box left by the curb. You pounced. You'd drag it into the living room or the yard, crawl inside, and suddenly it was a fort, a spaceship, a hideout with your own rules. You'd cut out windows with dull scissors, tape pieces together with masking tape that barely held, and draw doors with broken crayons. You'd have sleepovers in there. Sometimes you'd even cry in there when things felt too big. It always smelled like cardboard and dust. And if it collapsed, well, you just waited for the next one. Because imagination was the real toy, and cardboard was always in stock. What was the best fort you ever built as a kid? Let me know in the comments below. Plastic army men, sold by the bag, usually for under $1. They were stiff, light, and rough around the edges, literally. They came in green, sometimes tan or gray, each with a different up in the dirt or on the shag carpet, ready for war. You'd flick marbles at them until only one was left standing. You'd build bunkers out of books and bury the losers like fallen heroes. You gave them names, rivalries, missions. They were cheap, sure, but they were yours. And when the battles were over, you lined them back up, ready for tomorrow. They were quiet, unbreakable, and loyal, just like the kids who played with them. A stick in a dirt pile. It sounds like a joke, but it was real. You'd find a patch of dry earth, grab a decent stick, and suddenly you were digging to the other side of the world. The dirt was your canvas, the stick was your tool. You dug trenches for your army men, buried treasure, and drew racetracks. It left your fingernails black and your knees brown, but you didn't care. That little patch of dirt became your kingdom. It was your sword, your shovel, your blueprint. You could draw whole cities and then destroy them with one swoop. It was the feeling of carving something from nothing. Jump ropes made from clothesline were the definition of make-do. You couldn't always afford the plastic ones from the store, but a long enough piece of clothesline and 2 willing hands gave you a toy. It was rough, thin, and would sometimes burn your palms, but you jumped anyway. It slapped the pavement like a drum beat, marking time between laughs. The rope would leave little red marks on your ankles and arms, and you wore them like medals. It wasn't about the rope itself, it was about what you did with it. Fun wasn't about the price tag. It was about the rhythm. Used board games from garage sales were like treasure chests missing half the jewels. But you still played. You found them in cardboard boxes next to chipped mugs and old lamps. Sometimes the pieces were scattered, the rules were missing, and the dice were from a different game entirely. But you and your siblings made it work. You'd turn bottle caps into player tokens, use broken crayons to keep score, and rewrite every rule until the game felt like yours. Sometimes you'd even make up a whole new game from scraps, calling it a custom edition. It wasn't perfect, but it was yours, and you played like the game still had magic in it. Hand-me-down stuffed animals were more than toys. They were survivors. They had missing eyes, frayed seams, and patches that told their own stories. They came from cousins, older siblings, or a neighbor down the street. They smelled like closets and worn fabric. Their fur was matted, but they were soft in all the right places and firm enough to hold when you needed something solid. You gave them names even if the tag was gone, and you cried into them without embarrassment. They sat on your bed when the world felt too big. And even when they started to fall apart, you begged not to throw them away. Sometimes the most beat-up stuffed animal was the one with the biggest heart. Off-brand Matchbox cars were tiny engines of freedom. They were handed down, traded at school, or found in junk drawers. Some had bent axles and chipped paint, but every single one of them got raced across kitchen floors and the arms of worn-out couches. You made engine sounds with your mouth, built ramps from cardboard, and lined them up by color or speed. The cheap ones chipped paint fast and sometimes lost their tires on day one, but you kept them. It wasn't about the brand, it was about the play. Those little cars went places even when you couldn't. Penny candy and toy capsule prizes were the original budget jackpot. You walked into the corner store with a handful of change and came out feeling like you'd won the lottery. A paper sack filled with wax lips or candy cigarettes. Or that moment when you turned the dial, heard that heavy clunk, and opened the clear dome to reveal a tiny treasure, a sticky hand, a cheap plastic ring. Sometimes it was a disappointment, but it was still yours. You pressed your face to the glass, trying to pick your favorite before the crank decided your fate. Even tiny treasures felt big when they were yours to pick. Those are just a few of the things that made a kid's world back then. They weren't flashy, they weren't expensive. They just needed a little imagination. We learned that fun wasn't about the price tag. It was about what we did with what we had. So let me ask you, which of these simple joys brought back the strongest memory for you. Share your story in the comments. And if you're a fan of retro television, like this video and subscribe to the channel so we can keep these memories alive, one video at a time.
We laughed, we danced, we wore glitter and polyester like armor. Yet somehow, the strangest joys of the 1970s quietly vanished while we weren't looking. What weird little wonders did we lose? And why does remembering them feel like coming home to a life we forgot we loved? Avocado green and harvest gold appliances. They were not just colors, they were a mood, a way of life, a national obsession. If your family had a refrigerator, oven, or even a stand mixer in the 1970s, chances are it was proudly painted in avocado green or harvest gold. These colors seeped into American homes like smoke through an open window. They were earthy, comforting, and oddly futuristic, like they belonged in your grandmother's farmhouse and on a spaceship at the same time. If you grew up opening a harvest gold refrigerator to grab a can of orange soda, you remember how right it felt, even if it clashed with everything else in the room. That avocado green stove wasn't just where your parents cooked dinner, it's where you waited to hear the pop of the popcorn. That color wasn't a design choice, it was the background of your life. What makes it funny now is how seriously everyone took it, how confidently we wrapped our whole kitchens in two shades that looked like mustard and guacamole got in a fight. Clogs, they clacked, they thudded. They echoed across school hallways and suburban sidewalks like someone dropped a toolbox full of maracas. Clogs were not just shoes, they were the sound of the 1970s growing louder with every step. Imported in spirit from the Netherlands, but reimagined in American malls, these wooden-soled shoes made fashion louder, literally. Kids wore them, parents wore them, teachers wore them, and then regretted it halfway through the school day. There was no sneaking around in clogs. They announced you like a drumline at a parade. They were sturdy, comfortable if you got used to them, and they felt weirdly rebellious. Maybe they were impractical, maybe they didn't match anything you owned. But they looked good with bell-bottoms. The funny part is how seriously we took them, like wearing a chunk of painted wood strapped to your foot was the height of elegance. TV dinners. TV dinners were more than food. They were a revolution in a foil tray. You'd pull one from the freezer, peel back the corner, and 25 minutes later, you had dinner, kind of. The mashed potatoes were crusty on one side and icy on the other. The gravy had merged with the corn, and that chocolate brownie in the corner was a molten rock capable of scorching the roof of your mouth until Tuesday. But none of that mattered, because you got to eat on a metal tray in the living room while watching All in the Family. TV dinners gave families a strange kind of freedom, the freedom to be alone, together. The funny part is how futuristic they felt, even though they were never that good. We laugh now, but we kept buying them because they gave us time. And back then, that was worth more than taste. Beaded door curtains. Walk through one, and you were instantly transported into another room, another vibe, another world. Beaded door curtains were not just home decor, they were portals. One second you were in the hallway, the next you were in your older sister's bedroom, where incense was burning and David Bowie was staring from the wall like a glittery prophet. The soft clatter of beads colliding became a soundtrack all its own. And you could never sneak through them, no matter how hard you tried. They were the tattletales of the 1970s. Whether they were made of bamboo, plastic, or little wooden cylinders, beaded curtains promised something magical, something adult, something groovy. The funny thing is, how useless they were at actually dividing rooms or providing privacy. But who cared? In a time when your bedroom was your castle, beaded curtains were your drawbridge. Latch hook rugs. It started with a blank mesh canvas, a plastic hook, and a tangle of brightly colored yarn that somehow always ended up in knots. To a kid, or even a bored adult in the 1970s, latch hook rugs were more than just crafts. They were a challenge, a hobby, a rainy day savior. Maybe it was a rainbow, a unicorn, or a cartoon tiger. Either way, the finished product hung on your wall with pride. You made it. You hooked every tuft. You stabbed that canvas like a warrior with a mission. There was something almost meditative about it, something calming in the repetition, pulling strand after strand through the mesh while the Brady Bunch played in the background. Looking back, it's funny how latch hook rugs turned an entire generation into tiny weavers with zero idea what they were doing. Roller disco. Roller disco was not just a hobby. It was a way of becoming someone else for a night. You laced up your skates like you were putting on a costume, stepped into that pulsating rink, and suddenly you were untouchable. The music was always booming. Donna Summer, Chic, the Bee Gees, and the disco ball spun like a lighthouse, a guidepost, a disco deity above your head. The outfits were louder than the music. Metallic pants, crop tops, rainbow suspenders. You didn't have to be good, you just had to be in. And when the whole rink skated to the beat, it felt like the world was healing itself, one backward crossover at a time. The funny part is, most of us fell more than we skated, but no one cared. You'd laugh, crawl back up, and keep going because the floor was freedom. Rabbit ear antennas. Television in the 1970s wasn't just something you watched, it was something you adjusted, wrestled, and pleaded with. Every household had rabbit ears, those spindly metal antennas perched like insect limbs on top of the TV. If the picture went fuzzy, you didn't call for help, you got up. You grabbed the antennas like you were performing some ancient ritual. You waved them in the air, you wrapped them in foil, or jammed a wire hanger in there just to get the evening news. And when the signal came in, crystal clear, everyone in the room would freeze. Don't breathe. Don't move. Just let it play. It was a shared experience, with one person crouched behind the set while another yelled, "It's better! No, wait, go back!" The funny part is, it worked just enough to keep us trying. This wasn't passive viewing, it was active survival, and you felt like you earned that episode. Beanbag chairs. Beanbag chairs were anti-furniture. They didn't care about structure, design, or lumbar support. They just wanted you to plop down, sink in, and forget your bones existed. They came in colors that didn't match anything: burnt orange, pea green, electric blue, and textures that felt like cheap dreams, usually vinyl, sometimes velvet, always squeaky. You didn't sit on a beanbag, you disappeared into it. For kids, they were a throne. For teens, a nest. For adults, a regrettable purchase they kept anyway. They were rebellion in blob form. The funny part? They were impossible to get out of gracefully. You didn't stand, you rolled, you crawled, you clawed at the air like you were escaping quicksand. Pet rocks. Pet rocks were the most absurd, brilliant, and completely sincere product of the 1970s. Imagine walking into a store and buying a rock. Not a toy that looked like a rock, an actual rock. And your new pet came in a box with straw bedding and a care manual. In a world spiraling through inflation, war, and cultural tension, Americans collectively decided to laugh by adopting a rock. The genius was not the object, but the moment. For a few dollars, you bought not just the item, but the idea that maybe life didn't need to be so serious. Why did something so silly feel like the most comforting purchase of the decade? That's a question only the 70s can answer. Clackers. Clackers were dangerous, but that just made them better. Two acrylic spheres tethered by string, daring you to swing them so perfectly they'd smack together in a perfect rhythm. When you got it right, magic. When you didn't, bruises. Every playground in the 1970s echoed with the unmistakable clack, clack, clack of kids testing their reflexes and pushing their luck. There were no rules, no instructions, just noise and adrenaline. They were banned in some schools and feared by parents, but that only added to their mystique. You weren't just playing, you were proving something. You had skills, or at least you were brave enough to try. The funny part is, we kept buying them, breaking them, and begging for more. Clackers weren't safe, but they were unforgettable. From avocado green kitchens to the clatter of clogs in the hallway, these weren't just things. They were the wonderfully weird, surprisingly profound, and hilariously funny background of our lives. They were the moments we shared, the fads we followed, and the memories that make us smile today. What funny thing from the 70s do you remember most? If this video took you back, hit like it, drop your favorite memory in the comments, and subscribe before the ice cream truck disappears down the block. Thanks for watching.
You know, looking back on it now, our first TV wasn't just an appliance. It was this giant wooden box that my family bought one summer day in 1957. It had a small, curved black and white screen, and it sat in the corner of our living room like a piece of furniture. Every single night, my whole family would gather in front of that small screen like we were sitting around a campfire. It became the new heart of our home. There was no remote control, of course. You had to get up and turn a big chunky knob to change the channel, and you'd hear a loud clunk with every turn. It was a ritual. We watched what was on, and we loved it. There were harmless sitcoms like I Love Lucy, variety shows like The Ed Sullivan Show and The Nightly News. And after the broadcast ended for the night, the screen would go to that static, snowy test pattern, and we knew it was time for bed. Then in the mid-60s, everything changed like magic when my dad brought home a color TV. I can still remember the first time I saw color on the screen. It was like a new world. The characters on the Ed Sullivan Show came to life, and cartoons looked more vibrant than ever. But not everything on TV was harmless. There was one show I will never, ever forget, one that haunted me for a lifetime. It was The Twilight Zone. Every episode started with Rod Serling's eerie narration talking about a fifth dimension, and then the story would begin. These weren't stories about physical monsters, they were about psychological fear, an alien appearing as a human, a person trapped in a bizarre, mysterious town. What was so haunting were the twist endings. They didn't give you a sense of safety. They left you with a lingering world around you. After that, the TV kept evolving. It got bigger, flatter, and it became this central piece in a large wooden cabinet in the living room. Then the remote control arrived, and it was a revolution. It turned watching TV from an active ritual into a more passive, comfortable experience. This was also the golden age of American television, with classic shows like MASH and Happy Days, and the emergence of cable TV, which opened up a whole new world of channels. And then we got the VCR. That changed everything. We no longer had to wait for a show to air. We could record it and watch it whenever we wanted. That was the beginning of the end for the communal family viewing experience. By the 90s, everything shifted again. Television was no longer a sacred family-only ritual. Families started buying more TVs. There was one in the living room for the parents, and a smaller one in the kids' room. The shows also became more complex, with serialized dramas and sitcoms like Seinfeld and The X-Files. The TV was no longer that campfire for the whole family. It had become a personal entertainment device. One person could be watching the news, another could be watching a sci-fi show. It was a private experience, and in a way, it was the start of the digital age that we live in today. You know, the story of my TV wasn't just about technology. It was a story about the evolution of American family life and culture. And The Twilight Zone, even though it scared me, was a crucial part of my growing up. It taught me about fear, wonder, and the power of a story. The TV went from being a communal gathering point to a personal device, and the way we watch has changed forever. It's a journey from a single point of connection to a world of endless choices. What's your story? What TV shows have stayed with you your whole life?
What a decade to be alive in. The 1970s was a time when cars, music, clothes, and everything was different. If you were alive back then, you got to experience life as it really was. We were fortunate that we did most of our idiotic things long before the internet. There was never any fear of someone recording us, and then seconds later, uploading it to share with the world. Technology in the 70s was relatively simple, and yet our lives were full. There was a different kind of magic, a different kind of freedom. In a world without smartphones or streaming, our entertainment and connections were much more tactile. Many kids had a close and play record player with some 45 records to play, with those big plastic adapters for the small holes in the middle. The sound was warm and fuzzy, and you could feel the music coming from the needle. Polaroid cameras were another cool item to have. You did not have to wait 2 weeks to see your photos. The photograph magically appeared after 60 seconds of anticipation. It felt like a small miracle, watching the image slowly come to life in your hands. And remember the Panasonic AM/FM wrist radio. It made listening to music fashionable, a small piece of technology that felt straight out of a science fiction movie. If you wanted to speak to someone, you either picked up the rotary phone and gave them a call, listening to the satisfying whir as the dial spun back into place. Or you simply went over to their house. You certainly didn't have Facebook or Instagram to hide behind. If the person you wanted to speak with was away, then you wrote them a letter. Back then, it was very common to have a pen pal or two, and there was a real joy in waiting for that handwritten letter to arrive, a piece of someone's thoughts delivered by the postma. Our tablets weren't high-tech, but we did have hours of fun drawing endless images on the Etch-a-Sketch. It was a simple joy, a test of patience and skill, and a masterpiece could be erased with a simple shake. Our parents wanted us outside, and we wanted to be there. It was the only time when they could enjoy some peace and quiet or maybe get something done around the house. People didn't have cell phones or apps to track where their kids were, so it was okay if parents had no clue where their kids were. It was very common for kids to be gone all day and then come home when the streetlights came on. We remember when the 10 o'clock news came on, they would give out a reminder to parents in case they forgot to check on their kids. It's 10 o'clock. Do you know where your kids are? When we played outside, we fearlessly climbed trees, jumped over fences, explored and made secret hideouts in poorly constructed tree houses or out in the woods. It was all about getting out of the house and having fun. We never had play dates back in the 70s. We just went outside and play, and eventually other kids from the neighborhood would join in on the fun. It could be anything from hide and seek, tag, hopscotch, jump rope, or playing catch. Of course, having a bike was very important as a kid. It meant a little more freedom, and it could take you places further away. But what kid didn't love a little danger? We all enjoyed a good challenge from time to time and never backed down from it. Toys in the 70s had an element of danger, and that was okay. Parents didn't sue the manufacturer, but it did teach you how to be careful and think about what you were doing. This was especially true with the possibility of burns from the Easy Bake Oven, Shrinky Dinks, or a wood-burning kit. Even lawn darts and clackers had the possibility of sending something sharp flying. We had a lot of choices when it came to toys and board games, but most of the time kids were playing outside. We learned how to entertain ourselves even if we just had some sticks, and we could make a game out of anything using our imagination. Nutrition has changed a lot over the year. We weren't trying to eat unhealthy, but we did the best with what we had. Sugar cereals such as Fruit Loops or Captain Crunch was a breakfast that we preferred. Or if you had some Pop-Tarts, you could grab that and head out the door to play with your friends. Cheese Whiz became the fun snack that you and your friends or siblings would see how much you could stuff into your mouth. Swanson TV dinners were an occasional treat so that your mom did not have to cook. It was extra special when the TV trays came out, because that meant something was coming on television and no one wanted to miss it. The crazy thing was that people seemed to be thinner, perhaps because they were outside and more active. We did not have kids with peanut allergies or strawberry allergies, so sandwiches made with these ingredients were very popular at school. No one ever seemed to be on gluten-free, dairy-free, GMO-free, fat-free, or sugar-free diets. You just packed whatever you wanted inside that metal lunchbox and called it good. Whatever was in there wasn't going to go bad in there for a few hours, and that was without ice packs, like kids used today. When it was hot outside, there was nothing better than a refreshing garden hose. Of course, don't forget to let it run a while or the water was going to be too hot, but if we were really lucky, then we might have some Kool-Aid or Tame. If it was good enough for the astronauts, then it was certainly good enough for us. Secondhand smoke in the 1970s was something that we all experienced. Whether someone smoked in your house or not, it was going to be everywhere else. And I do mean everywhere. As kids, we all had things that mimicked adults and their addictions. We had bubble-blowing pipes, bubble-gum cigars, candy cigarettes, Fun Dip, and even Pixie Sticks. For us kids, it was really all about getting more sugar, and who didn't want the candy bracelets or necklace that was great when you were playing outside with your friends? We did not worry about germs at all, and instead, we just offered them a bite from it. Television programming went off the air at night, and with no cell phones or computers, it was much easier to get a full night's sleep. It really is amazing to think about what all we did without helmets, seatbelts, or cell phones. Heck, even our mothers were smoking and drinking while they were pregnant with us, yet somehow, many of us survived. Generally speaking, the younger generation seemed to suffer from more anxiety than we or our parents did. Much of this new kind of shaming or needing to have some issues seems to come from television or the internet. We were less exposed to all of that in the 1970s. Did you ever hear of a kid being diagnosed with ADD or ADHD? Perhaps we all just need to be outside more and enjoy each other's company in person without all the distractions. It really is amazing to think back on it all. My childhood wasn't perfect, but it was real.